The G5+ countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom and Poland, have announced their readiness to intensify sanctions against Russia. In a joint statement, the foreign minister of these 6 countries affirmed that they will use all available tools to prevent the Russian Federation from continuing its war against Ukraine. Additionally, they confirmed that Russian assets in Western countries should remain frozen.
We remain committed to supporting Ukraine's repair, recovery, and reconstruction in coordination with international partners. We reiterate that Russia's assets should remain immobilized until Russia ceases its war of aggression against Ukraine and compensates it for the damage caused. From the joint statement of the G5+ foreign ministers on the German Foreign Ministry website.
The European Union reached a similar conclusion at the EU summit on March 20th. However, Ukraine continues to push for the confiscation of Russian assets. According to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the confiscation should occur soon, as after a potential end to the war, this opportunity might no longer be available.
The safest option is to take these frozen assets and use them for what Russia has destroyed, restoring logistics, the army, building bomb shelters for children in schools, universities, and hospitals. And there's a lot of this to do. I believe that if we don't find a way not just to freeze, but also to seize these assets, we may end up fighting the Russians for them after the war ends. So, to avoid that, we need to take them while we still have the chance.
There is considerable skepticism regarding the confiscation of Russian assets in Berlin and Brussels. Some of the arguments against it are legal, such as the issue of sovereign immunity. Others are market-related, including concerns about the stability of the euro and the attractiveness of the EU investment climate.
To avoid the risk of Russia's central bank assets unfreezing and returning to the hands of the Kremlin in July, Europe needs to use the countermeasures argument and put the assets beyond Moscow's reach. This can be done by transferring them to a new vehicle set up in Belgium, with EU governance oversight, and placing the assets' legal title in a trust for Ukraine's benefit. Importantly, the assets wouldn't be transferred to Ukraine, but would be used to generate a steady stream of annuity income to support its defense procurement and ongoing funding needs. From an article by the head of the European Center for Financial and Security Studies, and director of the Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies at RUSI, Kinga Redlowska and Tom Keatinga, from Politico publication.
Countries such as Poland, the Czech Republic, the Baltic states, and Northern Europe consistently advocate for the confiscation of Russian assets and their use for Ukraine's needs. The Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Gintautas Birdas, noted that the frozen assets should serve as a leverage against Moscow, which continues to sabotage peace efforts.
When talking about the Russians, we believe in the measures and precedents that have worked before. Firm military power, the use of economic sanctions, and using frozen assets as leverage. And if this is the first time in history that Russia behaves differently, I would be very surprised. Gintautas Budris, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, in an interview with RBK Ukraine.
In 2022, following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the G7 countries froze the Russian central bank's assets totaling nearly 300 billion euros. These assets are held in financial institutions around the world and generate income. As of now, the US, EU, UK, Canada and Japan are using them as collateral for a 45 billion euro loan to Ukraine. Meanwhile, as of November 2024, the total documented direct damage caused by Russia to Ukraine's infrastructure is approximately $170 billion, according to the Kyiv School of Economics. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Valeria Nikipelova, UATV News.
The European Union will only consider lifting restrictions on the aggressor state if it fully withdraws its troops from Ukrainian territory, French President Emmanuel Macron stated following a summit of European leaders in Paris.
In terms of short-term support for Ukraine, we also decided unanimously that this is not the time to lift whatever sanction on Russia and there will not be a lifting of sanctions before peace is clearly established. And so, we plan to continue the economic pressure, especially on the shadow fleet and on some industrial capacities. We will remain mobilized on these points.
The Kremlin began pushing for sanctions relief immediately after its first meeting with the US delegation. Now Moscow has issued an ultimatum. Agreements on ensuring safe navigation in the Black Sea will only take effect if the West lifts sanctions on Russian Agricultural Bank and other institutions involved in international trade in food and fertilizers. Additionally, Russia demands the reconnection of its financial institutions to the global SWIFT banking system. Washington has stated that Russia's demands will be assessed, but much depends on the Kremlin's actions.
It will be determined by Russian leadership's next moves, whether the sanctions go up or down. And President Trump, I think, would not hesitate to raise the sanctions if it gives him a negotiating advantage.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy believes that any relaxation of sanctions would only lead to further demands from Russia. On the contrary, he argues that increasing pressure on Moscow is the only way to achieve meaningful results.
We hope and believe that the U.S. will have the strength to force Vladimir Putin into an unconditional ceasefire. Sanctions against Russia must remain in place and be strengthened for as long as the Russian occupation continues.
The European Union has also rejected Russia's demands. According to a statement from the European Commission, lifting sanctions on the aggressor would grant Moscow yet another advantage. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz warned that making concessions to the Kremlin would be a serious mistake. Meanwhile, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed that Ukraine's partners are working to tighten restrictions on Russia to strengthen Kyiv's negotiation position.
Second, complete clarity that now is not the time for lifting of sanctions. Quite the contrary, what we discussed is how we can increase sanctions to support the US initiative to bring Russia to the table through further pressure from this group of countries.
According to EU Observer, citing European diplomats, the EU and its allies are working on a 17th package of sanctions, with proposals likely to be presented by early summer. However, sources caution that it is too early to set a firm timeline.
A fourth diplomat voiced caution on the timing, saying, "It's too speculative at this point. We have to see how the U.S.-Russia-Ukraine peace talks unfold." From EU Observer publication.
The previous 16th package of sanctions included 83 measures targeting 48 individuals and 35 entities responsible for actions undermining or threatening Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence. The sanctions included 74 more vessels of the Russian Shadow Fleet. In addition, the EU for the first time imposed a ban on transactions with credit and financial institutions established outside Russia that use the financial messaging system of the Bank of Russia. It also disconnected 13 Russian banks from the SWIFT payment system. Brussels expanded the list of under-sanctioned goods and suspended the broadcasting licenses of 8 Russian propaganda media outlets in the EU. The 16th package also included additional restrictions on Russia's ally Belarus. Reported by Serhiy Kulas, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.